Possibly, I need someone to speak for the microphone. Possibly, I need someone to speak for the microphone. Possibly, I need someone to speak for the microphone.
Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, like through the Angers Road section. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue that has been raised for quite some time. As I set out in the answers, I think it was probably considered a rat run. Whether some of that is also cutting through Totterdown, I don't think there's any kind of the Angers Road disagreement that issue exists. We don't have specific data for that. I know that is an outstanding issue.
What I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of governance.
Whether some of that is also
move on to the new form of governance. One of the tests of whether that governance is working will be whether we have our own form
know that is about
What I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
whether some of that is also
move on to the
Totterdown.
whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going to whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going to whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going to whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going to whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going to whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going to whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going to whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement we're going whether we have
I know that.
what I would say is that we are coming to the end of this particular form of government.
Whether some of that is also Totterdown.
Well, just this recent statement
Page then, we wanted to look at some of the potential impacts of the clean air zone. All of these I can kind of caveat with a list sort of as long as my arm, to be honest, because there's lots of other things that happen that impact a lot of these issues. So retail footfall rates, for example, are impacted by things like the cost of living crisis. COVID has been a big factor across all of these things that we're going to look at. There are changing patterns in retail, in transport, that are still going back to a new normal following COVID. But I think the thing we can see from retail footfall rates is there hasn't been a significant change in retail footfall in the city centre areas, which I think you would probably see as a positive, as there was some concerns that the CAS would lead to people not wanting to come into the city centre. What we can also see from the car park usage is that there is a reduction in car park usage at the galleries, which is typically one of the most popular, well-used car parks in the city centre. So that would tend to indicate we've got similar numbers of people in the city centre with less car usage driving that. So one of the expectations from the CAS when we presented the full business case was that some of those trips would move to walking, cycling, bus usage, etc. That would appear to be indicating expectations from the CAS. A lot of caveats that you would put against making any assumptions about the individual impact of the CAS on these particular measures appear to be indicating expectations from the CAS. A lot of caveats that you would put against making any assumptions about the individual impact of the CAS on these particular measures appear to be indicating expectations from the CAS. A lot of caveats that you would put against making any assumptions about the individual impact of the CAS on these particular measures appear to be indicating expectations from the CAS. A lot of caveats that you would put against making any assumptions about the individual impact of the CAS on these particular measures appear to be indicating expectations from the CAS. A lot of caveats that you would put against making any assumptions about the individual impact of the CAS on these particular measures appear to be indicating expectations from the CAS. A lot of caveats that you would put against making any assumptions about the individual impact of the CAS on these particular measures appear to be indicating expectations from the CAS. A lot of caveats that you would put against making any assumptions about the individual impact of the CAS on these particular measures appear to be indicating expectations from the CAS. A lot of caveats that you would put against making any assumptions about the individual impact of the CAS on these particular measures appear to be indicating expectations from the CAS. A lot of caveats that you would put against making any assumptions about the individual impact of the CAS on these particular measures appear to be indicating expectations from the CAS. Particular one that you'll see in the appendix, Lower Ashley Road, so just to the north of Junction 3, is an obvious route for avoiding the CAS if you're heading around to the north part of the city. That has seen additional traffic, which is as we would expect. Is an obvious route for avoiding the CAS if you're heading around to the north part of the city. That has seen additional traffic, which is as we would expect. Is an obvious route for avoiding the CAS if you're heading around to the north part of the city. That has seen additional traffic, which is as we would expect. Is an obvious route for avoiding the CAS if you're heading around to the north part of the city. That has seen additional traffic, which is as we would expect. Is an obvious route for avoiding the CAS if you're heading around to the north part of the city. That has seen additional traffic, which is as we would expect. Is an obvious route for avoiding the CAS if you're heading around to the north part of the city. That has seen additional traffic, which is as we would expect. Is an obvious route for avoiding the CAS if you're heading around to the north part of the city. That has seen additional traffic, which is as we would expect. Is an obvious route for avoiding the CAS if you're heading around to the north part of the city. That has seen additional traffic, which is as we would expect. Is an obvious route for avoiding the CAS if you're heading around to the north part of the city. That has seen additional traffic, which is as we would expect. pollution across the whole city. So the fact that we've seen that kind of 7% reduction in pollution across all the sites indicates that you will be seeing that reduction in background pollution across the city as well, which is beneficial and obviously a useful output of the CAS. Areas of potential traffic displacement we've covered already. I think the important point to note really output of the CAS. Areas of potential traffic displacement we've covered already. I think the important point to note really output of the CAS. Areas of potential traffic displacement we've covered already. I think the important point to note really output of the CAS. Areas of potential traffic displacement we've covered already. If we have appropriate schemes. If we move on to the next page, looking at the impact on journeys. There's a bit of fluctuation there on the first graph, but what you can see largely is that you've got a similar kind of level of journeys into the zone once people have got used to it. There's a bit of fluctuation. The vehicles compliance, I think you can see fairly clearly that there is an increase in compliant vehicles. So this graph is shortened. You haven't got the bottom 75% of it, because that is just blue compliant vehicles. So it's focusing in on the kind of core bit of the data. And what you're seeing is an increase in compliant vehicles from just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as we provide funding to stop those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as we provide funding to stop those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're And then seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some and then increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. Again, that's what we'd expect as what you're seeing is some increase in those vehicles, and people just under 85% to heading toward 90% between December 22 and November 23. is going to have a long-term 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 is going to have a long-term
But obviously cars are on but obviously cars are on but obviously cars are on
points that will show things
cars are on
points that will show things
cars are on
points that will show things
cars are on
points that will show things 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 air pollution in the centre of the city where there's a huge number air pollution in the centre of the city where there's a huge number air pollution in the centre of the city where there's a huge number air pollution in the centre of the city where there's a huge number air pollution in the centre of the city where there's a huge number air pollution in the centre of the city where there's a huge number air pollution in the centre of the city where there's a huge number air pollution in the centre of the city
all I can do is apologise because it. But all I can do is apologise because it. But all I can do is apologise because it. But all I can do is apologise because it. But all I can do is apologise because it.
9% that we've got across the board.
But that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose. But that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose. But that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose. But that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose. But that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose. But that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose. But that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose. But that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose. But that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose. But that's probably the best way to understand it, I suppose.
I'd appreciate separately, and I suspect Steve would as well, a response on that. I'd appreciate separately, and I suspect Steve would as well, a response on that. I'd appreciate separately, and I suspect Steve would as well, a response on that. I'd appreciate separately, and I suspect Steve would as well, a response on that. I'd appreciate separately, and I suspect Steve would as well, a response on that. I'd appreciate separately, and I suspect Steve would as well, a response on that. I'd appreciate separately, and I suspect Steve would as well, a response on that. I'd appreciate separately, and I suspect Steve would as well, a response on that. I'd appreciate separately, and I suspect Steve would as well, a response on that.
John?
Sorry, I'm not sure there was a question, Jeff, but there's some very, very valid points. So could I just make a couple of comments? Obviously, we are still in the relatively early stages, and it has been quite a complicated process just to follow the flows of the money through. Jeff, but there's some very, very valid points. So could I just make a couple of comments? Obviously, we are still in the relatively early stages, and it has been quite a complicated process just to follow the flows of the money through. Jeff, but there's some very, very valid points. So could I just make a couple of comments?
And there's the whole process of appeals that takes quite a long time. So it's quite difficult to estimate how much you will actually continue to generate from that. I won't say how it's going to be shown in the accounts, but I'm sure other people in the finance team will resolve that.
Thank you. I think, Chair, perhaps the point is that between resources and growth and regen scrutiny, we need to work out how this is looked at. I certainly don't want to duplicate things by asking them here, but given that we, on resources, we have looked very much at collection rates and provision rates and those issues. Somewhere, one of either Osm Resources or Growth and Regen needs to be looking at that and understanding the processes and how it's communicated to the public as well, without giving away trade secrets of how you operate some of the processes. But I just think we need to make sure we get that bit right.
I take that point, although I'm also conscious of what resources we have at present in scrutiny, but so it may be some time before we can do that. Christine, I'm conscious that you have to leave at 5. Do you want to ask any questions?
Yeah, I just got a follow up from what Councillor Gollop has asked about with those that are written off. What is the status of the car if the DVLA doesn't apparently know who the owner is? And what happens to, you understand that a car can't be traced, but you've got the registration number. Where does that information go? Because what that says to us is that everybody's at risk because people are driving unlawfully or illegally across our city.
Have we go? So there's a mixture of things in there, Councillor. So, I mean, I referred to this before, but certainly in the early days, the cameras weren't working as well as they should have done, so that was part of it. Subsequently, there are particular licence plates that, for example, you know, we had one which was in the media that had a particular dot in place, which meant it just couldn't register it, or if it did, it registered as the wrong type. So there are a number that, for whatever reason, the system can't seem to capture. It's a relatively low percentage. So undoubtedly there will be other things of more concern. There are foreign licence plates as well, which it struggles with. But undoubtedly there will be issues of concern in there, but it is quite hard to isolate that from the ones which it's just struggling to read.
Right, so is there any intention to do any further work around this? Because you haven't denied that there are cars that are driving across our city that may well be illegal or unlawful. But what you're saying to me is that you don't do anything with that. Have you got a breakdown of how many are foreign number plates, for example? Have you got a breakdown as to how many of the over 92,000 days of charge that haven't been paid that you've written off may well have been in those first months when the cameras weren't working? Is a lot. In my view, is a lot that you've written off. And what I'm concerned about mainly is that this is a public meeting. Those statistics are in the public, and they go, oh, you've collected 49%. I don't need to bother paying because you'll just write it off. In which case, it defeats the object of having it in the first place.
Yes, I mean, it's certainly not the case that we won't follow things up. It's fair to say that the enforcement was initially, we had a soft enforcement period. We have also had some cases, some of which have been well publicised, where for whatever reason the driver wasn't aware and took some time to find out. So there's certainly been a case of us using discretion in cases to look at it. And we also have had some cases where, as I said, the cameras weren't working as well as they should have done initially, and our systems and processes needed some improvement. I'm confident we have them now, so they're working well, and so are the processes. So I think you'll see those figures improve significantly, and we will, if people are deliberately and knowingly not complying with the system, then we will enforce against them, and we have the ability to take enforcement action against them.
Enforcement action in this council is not good across the board. Over 2 million on parking tickets was just written off in the last accounts. I don't have the confidence that the enforcement is there. That's the problem. You've got 49% of people that have paid up. Less than 50% is not. I mean, I appreciate the first few months, whatever. Maybe what I'm asking for is a comparison. So if you break down the stats, rather than giving us for the entire year, you break down those stats and say, this is the first 3 months, here's your percentages, this is the next 3 months, here's your percentages. So that, because I would have expected to see an improvement across a 12-month period, if those are the reasons why you're writing them off.
No, that's fair enough. We can show that improvement trend, Councillor, I'm sure. The other thing, say in that table where you're referring to the 49%, there is a significant percentage that are in train. So those are ones that are in the system at the moment. So it may be that they've just happened, or it may be that they're through the appeals process, which, as Adam said, does take quite some time. So that should be considered as part of that. But it would be, we were happy to look at getting you some more detail about what number of those are successfully charged and recovered, and how that's improved over time. We can do that.
Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. To follow on from Councillor Townsend's questions, it would be good to see some comparisons to see how well we are doing, say, comparison with London's ULEZ and how many PCNs they are processing and getting money back from. It would be good to have some benchmarking on that, please. Secondly, I would like to talk about traffic displacement and how we're actually monitoring this. So I live in Lockleys. I'm noticing a lot more traffic on Glenfern Road, Eastgate Road, James Street, where people are actively avoiding the clean air zone because they're scared of it and they don't realise about their vehicle, whether it is compliant or not compliant. And we're seeing a lot more traffic on those roads. Are you intending to do any pollution testing and also traffic counts on those roads that are being used as rat runs to avoid the clean air zone? Please.
So we're not doing additional traffic counts at present. There are actually some traffic counts going around in that area for looking at the minor road work that's ongoing. In terms of pollution monitoring, we have our pollution monitoring sites. If there are areas that you have specific concerns about, we could pass that to the pollution monitoring team and see if they would be happy to put a pollution monitoring device in that location. I think, the Lower Ashley Road results show what we would expect. I live in that area as well. I've seen the same thing, that there is more traffic using that route to avoid going into the zone on the M32, which is what the modelling expected, what was expected from the scheme. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. It's fairly evident. The question, I suppose, is what can be done about it, or what is proposed to be done about it. I wouldn't, though, expect that the air quality is in exceedance, but it will have got, whether it's got worse or not, I don't know. I'd have to check the specific data locations around that area.
Are you going to be looking at any other areas, such as the Wells Road areas that have been brought up here previously?
So I think the expectation always was that it would take some time to understand where the impacts were being felt, and then we would look to make changes to those areas. So that's why we've allocated the funding. The £10 million is in part to mitigate any particular impacts. We're well aware that there's lots of local traffic issues that people have across the city. Some of those will have been exacerbated or created by the CAS. Some of those already exist. Weighing up which are the most important to deal with, that will be a process for the committee system to decide how they want to do that, I guess.
And can I have one more question, Chair?
One quick one.
Not sure it's a quick one, but I'll go for it anyway. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I'm just wondering if you would have actually preferred to go down the London route of how you actually register for the ULEZ roads, ULEZ charge. So you register your vehicle for entering the ULEZ, and then you just get paid by direct debit if you enter it. Do you think that's an easier system to implement than the one you've got at the moment, where you actually have to, users have to register their journeys online for each individual journey?
I don't know particularly the specifics of the details of the differences between the systems. That sounds like an easier option. We have the system that we have. I don't know how feasible it would be to change it at this point, but we can certainly ask that question.
The option wasn't open to us.
Okay, so the option wasn't open to us at the time. The option wasn't open to us at the time to do that.
Yeah, I think it's pointing out that some of the conditions about what were introduced were set by JACU, I believe. So not every option was available. I'm going to move on to Councillor Fodor, and then Councillor Bradshaw, then Councillor Brown, and then back to Councillor Smith.
Right, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the information discussion so far. I share the frustration that this has barely been available to study. And one thing I'd like to is sort of comment that it's been really valuable that some individuals around the city have taken the trouble to pour through different aspects of this and highlight some of the things that have been revealed, because they were able to read it sooner than I was potentially, and they've highlighted some of the more interesting things about what's gone up rather than what's gone down and where. And I think we need to have much further study of that and I wish there was a proper sort of member briefing to allow some of those areas to be explored and prioritised and then debated. I was going to ask a question about what I do think is the ridiculous sort of the painful way of the charging model that has been used, because a lot of the frustration, a lot of the grief has been because people discover a penalty charge notice before they realise they'd accidentally entered the zone. If local residents could have had an account, then a lot of them would have had an account, would have happily paid each time they deliberately or inadvertently entered the zone, because they would have been willing to pay £9. But if they didn't pay £80 or sometimes double that because of not dealing with it or not realising it had arrived in time, they're pretty angry. And I think that's unnecessary grief that's been caused. So if we weren't allowed to do it, I think the authority needs to push back and say such things are really important lessons that need to be made available in future for any charging schemes that we do have, because local residents could register. Some of the myths and messaging is one of the things I was going to try and highlight, because there are still myths around about the scheme. Are we trying to improve and target the messaging for the people who don't seem to understand the scheme, or are spreading sort of inaccurate information? Because I'd like to know that we're helping to make it as easy and as smooth as possible for residents and users and local businesses who think they're in a congestion zone or a ULEZ or something which doesn't exist in this city, for instance, or think that all their residents will be charged for coming through the centre, not the shrinking percentage that actually don't comply. So first question really is that information being pushed out actively, because it would help make things work better in the city?
Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, just to return to this point, there was not an option was not offered to us for people to register their credit cards and to pay each time, because I did have several emails about that. This isn't a ULEZ scheme, and it isn't a congestion charge. Also, the point of this scheme is that we would like people not to drive polluting cars into the area. So it's rather surprising a Green Party councillor suggests that we should offer the facility for people to just have it removed from the money removed from their bank account.
Councillor Alexander, Councillor Martin Fodor asked you a question as an individual councillor, not on behalf of the Green Party. If please respond as the cabinet member. I'm not really interested in party politics in scrutiny.
Okay, we'll leave that aside. Then I'm surprised that any councillor who is concerned about the levels of pollution in the city would want a facility whereby people could go regularly because they've got large amounts of money in their bank account and just pay to go backwards and forwards through it. We don't want polluting cars in the city because people are dying from that pollution.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question? Can we please avoid getting into party disputes?
Of course, this wasn't a party point. Some of us have been calling for cleaner air for a very long time. But making a scheme that's painful for those where it doesn't need to be seemed unhelpful. On the boundary issues, so again, at the very earliest stage of this scheme being imposed on the city, I raised the question of the impacts on the boundary. My question about that is that we've been told there will be funds for local transport schemes that can alleviate some of the impacts around the boundary and caused by journeys that have now changed. When are those going to happen? How are they going to be implemented? And will they actually happen when they're needed, like before the scheme reaches
Martin,
stage
sorry,
4?
just to interrupt me a moment, because we have still got another section which is about the finances and how the finances will be spent. So this seems to be more a question for that section.
Well, this is about helping to tackle the boundary issues, which are impacts that are reflected in the monitoring. But I'm happy to park that for the moment. The other issue is the problems at some of the contentious junctions where it's been revealed that there are particular sites on entry or exit of the scheme where particular numbers of penalty charges charges are being levied. So there are clearly some complicated or kind of difficult locations. Is there work being targeted on those locations as well?
Okay, that sounds like a question that might be available to be answered.
Not specifically at this stage, no. You know, we're aware of those numbers. Obviously, you know, we have a lot of schemes going on. We have those discussions with the area committees about where they feel their issues are.
You're saying there will be discussions with area committees about those?
Well, it'll be for area
This is the first
committees.
I've seen of this.
It'll be for area committees to raise those concerns and propose schemes as per the area committee process.
Okay. So I'm conscious that some committees have waited 4 or 5 years for small local transport schemes.
Yeah,
Will
Martin, I
this
think that's
resource be
going to be...
available when it's needed? Because stage 4 has mentioned as kind of the removal of the scheme itself. At that point, there might be new problems encountered rather than dealing with these existing problems, sort of boundaries and junctions.
I think that particular issue about local transport issues is addressed in the second part, but John, do you want to respond?
Okay.
I'm in your hands. Certainly, there's something I'd like to say about that, but we can leave it to the next part.
Yeah, because I think there's actually one of the slides refers to it.
Okay.
I'm going to move on to Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I think where air quality has improved, we should welcome it. You know, I was looking through the list of the testing points, the assessment points, and I see Parsons Street, the air quality around Parsons Street, which, you know, part of it's in my ward, it all used to be in my ward, had notorious legacy problems with poor air quality, the school nearby, and I see, you know, quite a few locations near schools where the air quality is improved. So I think we should welcome that. I share the Chair's concern about PM 2.5 and PM 10, and I wondered if there was any modelling that could be done alongside the reduction in NOx. And obviously this is a public health measure aimed at NOx, but I wondered if there's any correlation that could be plotted alongside the reduction in NOx in terms of the impact on particulates. Presumably, if we are deterring more polluting vehicles, then that must have an impact on particulate levels as well. I wanted to ask about navigation. I see some government announcements about the granularity of information on sat-nav and mapping, and I wondered if that could be brought in to kind of help people work out where the CAS kind of interception points were and how to sort of complete their journey. The other point is a funding point, which I'll leave. I wondered if there was any assessment of the pace of change in the commercial fleets in the city. There's quite clearly vans and trucks were an important target, particularly those older fleets, including our own within the council, and I wondered if there's any assessment on that front. Last point echoes back to the public forum about the need for a connected public transport network, and you know, we've got to offer people alternatives to travel, particularly those single car journeys, those short journeys. So, you know, a point to the Public Transport Authority, WECA, to put our public transport network back again. I'll leave the other point about finance until later, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bradshaw. Adam?
Yeah, I'll try and remember. I might have to ask. So if I take the last one first, yeah, yes, improving public transport is key to making things like this work. You know, it's very disappointing when bus services were cut just as the CAS was implemented. We have the BSIP funding, which is seeking to improve people's access to public transport, reducing costs. You know, that's a benefit. We have a big capital programme of work, so those sort of schemes do take a long time, though. So then the other point is, if you can just...
So there was one on the pace of change in the commercial fleet, and I'd put our own fleet into that category as well.
Yeah, I don't have data on the pace of change of the commercial fleet. I can ask if we have that. We are looking at our fleet as to what we can do with our fleet, and there is still funding available from the grants that we had from government to upgrade vehicles, and we're also going to look at whether we can make it easier for that to be accessed so that we can continue that change.
And then one of the other points was on the particulate front in terms of mapping
So
the impact and the reduction of NOx.
So, there probably will be a much smaller improvement in PM because PM is generated by a number of things like brakes, tyres, as much as it is the fuel emissions and, wood burning, that sort of thing. It will be really hard to say whether the CAS has had a particular benefit on particulate matter pollution, I would expect. There's a lot more sources of it. The CAS doesn't really lead to a significant reduction in vehicle journeys. I say a lot of those particulates come from the brakes and the road wear and the wheels and stuff, so it's unlikely there's been significant improvements, but we can ask the air quality team as to whether they have a view.
And then the final point was about navigation, particularly the announcements around sat-nav and wayfinding.
Yeah, we do work with sat-nav companies a lot. They're a bit of a law to themselves. We make requests of them, whether they accept them and take them on board. A lot of it is automated. So we do have those discussions, but we're not always successful with getting them to do what we'd like them to do.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a point and two questions. The first point is there's an awful lot of data in here, which is, and in one way, really helpful, and another way is a little bit bewildering. And to me, in terms of the way I interpret data and the way it's presented. For example, the table with the data for each of the monitoring points is really difficult to read because it's there's no sort of form of color coding or indication as to where or sorting by by the levels of pollution or the levels of improvement or whatever. So that's the first thing. Maybe a heat map or something could have helped us identify where the continuing problems are. And the other point is related to what Councillor Gollop said in the presentation of the financial data, which is part of this report, but also probably coming on relevant to the following report as well, in terms of breaking it down into fiscal years, essentially with my audit, to make it more understandable of what's been raised in a particular fiscal year, what's forecast to be raised in following years. Anyway, that's beside the point. Well, it's not beside the point, but that's my little rant. The questions I had, Councillor Gollop asked about Blackboy Hill, and you sort of explained the issue there. Can you explain what the issue is with the galleries monitoring point? I know the footnote suggests that further investigation is needed, but obviously you're aware that something is an issue with the galleries monitoring point. And it also says that more details will be included in the BCC 2024 ASR. What is that?
So I don't know what's caused the galleries one. We would expect to see a significant decrease because there's a lot less traffic there now. Since Bristol Bridge went in, it's reduced the traffic flows through there. So it does appear to be an anomalous result, and the air quality team are looking into why that is. The ASR, I'd have to check with the air quality team. I don't know the detail of what that is.
Okay, so the problem with the galleries data is basically it's not showing what you expect it to show, and
it seems very wrong, like the Black Boy Hill one. I would say as well, we do have some maps that I could send you showing that data, so that might be easier for you.
That would be useful. The other question I had was regarding the penalty notices issued, and there's the data about the numbers issued at each of the access points into the zone, and some of those are significantly high. Now, it looks like the ones that are significantly high are also the busiest routes into the city. I guess my question is, are those figures proportionately in line with what you would expect, or is there potentially issues with signage in the lead up to some of those access points?
Yeah, so they are generally higher where the traffic flows are higher. I think you'll also find they're a bit higher where you would expect out of town people to be coming through, like around the M32 Cumberland Basin, but those are the busiest roads as well. So there is that correlation. We have responded to people's requests about signage, to improve signage. We've put up VMS, like variable message signs, made various changes along those lines. It has been a bit of a struggle getting the level of signage we like on the M32 because we have to work with national highways on that front, but we do have a good signage there. So where those issues have been raised with us, we have responded and improved signage in those areas. But I think in general, what you'll see is that the busiest roads have the most infringements.
So you're confident that the signage situation as it is now is obviously meets criteria and is adequate for the job?
Yeah, with the caveat that you speak to drivers, well, I didn't see that sign. It's like, well, you know, you've got a driving license, you're supposed to look at all the signage. It's difficult, you know, there's a lot of signs that people have to see, which is why those from out of town might be more susceptible to driving into a zone who haven't seen as much of the press about the clean air zone being in place and therefore being more aware of it.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. We're going to finish off with you, Councillor Smith, and then we'll move on to the financial presentation.
Thank you. I'll just pick one then. Picking up on the issues that Councillor Townsend raised about unpaid or dropped PCNs. There's been a case that's had quite a lot of publicity. A gentleman in Salford who's challenged quite a large number of these because he believes that they're unlawful. There's issues with the wording or whatever it might be. And in his words, quoted in the news article, he says, "I've won them by default because the moment the City Council sees the arguments, they withdraw." So can you give us an assurance that as far as anyone can possibly know, the PCNs we're issuing are lawful? And if they are, why aren't we challenging these cases instead of just dropping them?
Yeah, certainly. So I am aware of the case. As you can imagine, we've been following it quite closely. There were some items that we'd spotted that were a challenge. There were some items that individual spotted which we hadn't, which were a challenge, which we have now resolved, and they are. I don't know if you've seen the latest communication from him, but he's basically said he's given up and all the issues have now been resolved. So the Councillor, there were initially, so there was a reference to the wrong piece of legislation in one of the notices. So that has now been corrected. We got legal advice that said it wouldn't make a difference to the enforcement, but as I said, we have overall taken an approach of trying to be sympathetic, and where people are, have had issues or have flagged things, so we haven't pursued them. We're through those sort of stages now, so we will be, if anyone raises or questions any of the terminology, then we will pursue them. There's no question of that.
Okay, so how many PCNs have we issued and collected on where those issues did exist that are potentially unlawful? And is there a risk that a chunk of that, however many £1 million it is so far, is at risk and could be challenged and reclaimed?
I can't give you a number, but we have had advice that no, there isn't a risk of that.
Thank you, councillors. John, if you'd like to... Adam, you're going to... Okay, Adam, before you go, you mentioned about some maps. Can you send them to Lucy, and then Lucy can distribute them? Thank you. John, over to you.
Would you like us to move on to the financial bit? So I think Alex is just going to take us through the presentation which he prepared, which he has circulated, but only very late in the day. But it's a very short presentation, which we're just going to take you through.
Okay, thank you, and welcome to Alex. I believe this is your first appearance at OSM.
It is, thank you. So yeah, my name is Alex Hearn. I'm the Director of Economy of Place. I've got a short deck, slide deck to take you through today, which is effectively a summary of what is in the paper tabled for January's Cabinet meeting. So if we move on, please. So this slide is to describe the process upon which we arrived at tabling a proposal for the use of the net proceeds. So we start with the primary legislation, which is the Transport Act, which is effectively the basis upon which the government was able to ask us to introduce a clean air zone, and we produced, following the full business case, an order in 2022, which contains a lot of information in it. Obviously, you'd expect a lot of legal definitions, how the mechanics of the system work, eligibility, that sort of information. It also includes what is described as a 10-year plan and a 5-year plan, and that we are required to apply the net proceeds in accordance with that part of the order. Now, that part of the order also relates to local transport policies, and in the west of England, and of course within Bristol, local transport policies are contained within the joint local transport plan. So we have therefore taken what's directed within the order, what is a set of objectives and policies within the transport plan to arrive at a detailed programme to apply the net proceeds, and that is what is tabled at Cabinet on the 23rd. If we move on to the next slide, please. So in the previous item, we discussed that the difference between the clean air zone year and the financial year. And within the first financial year, so from November 22 to the end of March 23, £7 million worth of net proceeds were collected. It's on that basis, and of course there's been the figure that in its first full year it's been £26 million, that we're able to forecast net proceeds over time. And obviously that there's a relationship between that forecast and the expectation of compliance generally within the zone, because we see and we anticipate that there will be fewer non-compliant vehicles entering the zone. Now, on that basis, and assuming when compliance will be achieved, it is estimated that a total of £81 million worth of net proceeds can expect to be collected through the clean air zone. Now, the clean air zone, as we've discussed, will cease to exist at some point, and there's an assumption about that in terms of when compliance will be both achieved and then confirmed. But proceeds can continue to be invested, so collected proceeds can continue to be invested after that. So we're able to invest that for a longer period of time if we wish to. So and the final point to make is that we have modelled the forecast net proceeds, but we've also been working with our strategic partner for finance to verify our model and the assumptions that go into that, and they have confirmed to us that our assumptions are sound and reasonable. So if we move on to the next slide, please, which is the last slide of the presentation. So this summarises a key part of the Cabinet report. So effectively, having considered the content of the order and the joint local transport plan, what is proposed is 4 thematic areas. So improving public transport, and that involves use of the net proceeds to meet the cost of the transport levy contribution, but it also enables us to increase that contribution, particularly for supported services when contracts allow, and that's anticipated to be in 2025, so there's additional funding going in there. We had always intended that net proceeds would be able to contribute to our match funding envelope for city regional sustainable transport settlement. So There's £10 million identified for that. There will be some other sources of match funding for CRSTS, so that would include our share of EDF, Economic Development Fund, and there's some Section 106, but 10 million from CAS is proposed here. It's worth noting that that would unlock a substantial amount of investment, capital investment in the city for bus, walking and cycling priority measures, and we have a big programme of work between our transport team that Adam leads and our colleagues at the combined authority for delivering that. We also include a theme around improving and maintaining infrastructure. Buses, walking and cycling happens on a highway network, which, if not maintained and improved, will depreciate over time, which can discourage use of that form of mobility, and therefore it's important that we can continue to ensure that we have a network and improve a network that can encourage alternative forms of travel as well. So that is a theme, and includes an additional £3.5 million from 2024, so the next financial year through to 2028. And then finally, we include a theme around local and neighbourhood transport schemes, so £10 million of new funding for schemes that can be developed, including through the area committee system, and it will be for the area committees to work this out under the next governance model for the council, but this can be this can include, we anticipate this including proposals that could be sponsored from local communities, as was discussed earlier in relation to public forum questions. That also has the opportunity to dovetail with the use of community infrastructure levy receipts, and I know there's been some frustrations about our ability to deliver that, so I'm very conscious of that. So we're hopeful that the two of those together can increase the impact of area committee decision making within the new model. So that's the presentation. The cabinet report is already published. Happy to try to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Before I go to questions, I'm going to go to Councillors Fodor and Bradshaw first, because they had questions in the first round, which were probably more suited for this area. I'm just going to ask one quick question, which I think Councillor Alexander has already been working on as well, and you touched upon it with transport-related schemes that are funded by local seal. There is a large amount of frustration because there are schemes going back a long time that have not been funded. And all of us who are councillors, I think, in this room have raised concerns about that. Just before Christmas, all councillors were sent a list of some 55 transport-related local seal schemes. And there was concerns about whether they would ever be, when they would be able to get even scheduled for delivery. So can I take it that some of this funding, and Don, you may want to answer this, can be used towards bringing those schemes forward?
Yeah, I'm very happy to answer that one. Yes, so first of all, you're right, there has been some challenges around the delivery of that. Councillor Fodor, that is acknowledged. Apologies for that. This is very much, and it was something that Councillor Alexander has been, pushing with us for some time to address. And this allocation of significant amount of funding is about bringing forward new schemes, but it is also about bringing forward the means to deliver more effectively on the current schemes and going forward. So that is very much part of the plan, Councillor. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Because I think all of us can find it difficult to convince residents to support additional schemes when current ones are not being delivered. I'm now going to open up to the other members of OSM, so Councillor Fodor, and then Councillor Bradshaw.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, if there is funding for local transport schemes, and if some of it is going to be targeted at places impacted by this clean air zone, which is funding some of this this additional budget, it would be really helpful to know how and when it will be shared out, because there are definitely boundary effects. There are, when this was first consulted, so that's going back three years or more, I remember saying, asking if the boundary impacts would be monitored, and I was simply told it won't make the roads around the edge illegal. Not that there wouldn't be effects, but it just wouldn't make them illegal. So there are effects, we know it, but we have been putting people off. We've been pointing out we have no area SIL funding up till now. So if there's an allocation, how will it be apportioned, and when will it be accessed, and how will it be delivered in terms of actual putting schemes in place? Because as I said, if we get to stage 4 that's mentioned in the earlier report, and the scheme, the zone is taken away, but we've still never delivered anything that will deal with all the extra...
So we give somebody the opportunity to answer that question. Yeah. Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as we know over the last, and I have one local SIL scheme in my ward that's been 7 years in the delivery, and others have as well, I know. So we've all been affected by it. The transport team has, over the last 10 years, suffered really massive cuts to its income, which very, very largely comes from central government. We also had 30% inflation in construction costs last year. It's been a very, very difficult environment, but that's that's the reasoning behind it. But I asked for officers to send out an email in October to all councillors saying we are sorry for what has gone on. It isn't acceptable. We have a plan now to turn this round. Second email went out to all councillors in December, basically saying here's the list of the schemes which we have agreed to, or which you've voted for in the past. We respect the fact that those decisions have been made, and we will honour that. Where inflation has, in every case, caused the amount to increase, we will not ask for you to make another decision. We will find that from our central funding. We will deliver them, and here is a list of the officers responsible for each of the schemes. So we are now working through, excuse me, I mean, you understand that transport isn't like a shopping trip. It is about a mechanism of delivery, which is a number of officers and processes, etc. We're trying to restructure that to better deliver local schemes, to restore something of the road safety projects that we had in the past, which were lost, quite rightly, because there simply wasn't any money. There wasn't any money in 2016. Now, the net proceeds of CAS offer us opportunities to do things differently in a better way. But it is going to take a few months to restructure, to bring in new people, and to start to deliver what I know all councillors want, because I want that as well. And yes, mitigations where necessary for CAS can be included, but my first priority has always been the commitments that we have made to communities regarding local SIL schemes.
Thank you. Before I go back to you, I just want to reassure Councillor Bradshaw that, yes, Luckwell Road is on the list. Councillor Fodor.
Yeah. Well, I was waiting to hear about the bullet point that says there will be 10 million new funding to enable local and neighbourhood schemes. So I'd just like to know, like I said, how might that be made available? If that's additional extra funding and it's from the CAS proceeds, how will it be apportioned? So will we know that there can be an extra bid, certainly in the absence in my area of any funds for a bid? But we have problems, we have rat runs.
Yeah, we will certainly have to add in several £1 million to compensate for the inflation caused by disastrous central government.
So does that mean no new schemes despite the...
No, I think there will be enough to do more than that. But we still only have a delivery mechanism. If you gave me £10 million now, you would have nothing extra tomorrow, because it takes several months to build up an organisation and to change your processes in order to be able to deliver more widely and at greater scale. That's the reality of transport projects. So there will be more delivery, local SIL projects and others, but it's going to take weeks or months, and to a certain extent the next administration will decide what format that takes.
So the 81
Martin,
million...
hold on a second. I think, John, you wanted to come in.
Okay.
Just to supplement what Councillor Alexander was saying, really. So, yes, I mean, the process now is that the paper goes to Cabinet next week. So, assuming that's agreed, which I don't, but if that is agreed, then that 10 million of CAS funding will be allocated in that way, Councillor. So, that is above local SIL. As Councillor Alexander said, there's been some challenges in allocating that and making that deliver the projects, but that would still be available. So this is additional. This is CAS funding. We at that point, which we haven't got it approved yet. We will then, sit down with Councillor Alexander and do some initial thinking about how to utilise that. But we haven't done, just to be very open with you, we haven't done that well yet. And as Councillor Alexander has said, you have plans to put the structures in place to deliver more effectively, but will take a little bit of time.
Yeah. Just to clarify, I'm delighted there will be plans to get things delivered that we've been waiting for. But the slide before said 81 million net proceeds expected. So could we have something ready for the new committees to look at, or the new area committees when formed, so that they know there is funding in the pipeline above SIL? Because this is above the SIL.
Martin, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you a moment, because I think you're going on a slight tangent. What is in this thing is that there is going to be £81 million estimated to be available. Right. That's going to be over a period of several years.
Of course.
So when the committee model comes into place, that whichever administration or whichever policy group is making those decisions can then decide where to allocate that funding. It's not something we can do today in this committee meeting, and it also, to a certain extent, wouldn't be right for, and Don, I'm sorry you excuse me saying this, for the current administration to make decisions on funding that won't be available until post-May.
Totally understand, but there's going to be a pipeline of funding. This is what the report's telling us. And
yes, there will be a pipeline of funding, but at the moment, there's a report coming to the Cabinet, but it's not going into the level of detail which I think you're looking for at the moment. And also, I think it's not going to resolve the issue you have in your ward, for instance, where there's a lack of SEER, because those SEER is related to development taking place, and there isn't very much development in some wards.
But there is rat running caused by the Clean Air Zone.
Yeah, and there's other allocations of funding which are highlighted in that scheme, but we will get the details on that. And what I'm going to do is move on, because we are running out of time, so I'm going to move on to Councillor Bradshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to resist the temptation to talk at length about the Duckmore Road, Luckwell Road crossing, which is another of the 7-year schemes, and I'm pleased that that's nudging along. It's progressing. As somebody who's kind of had some involvement in the transport sphere for a number of years on and off, I definitely welcome the additional funding, because it has been starved of funding due to cuts, reductions in grant, and obviously the impact of inflation and capacity pressures as well. But I am concerned, given that the CAS is a time-limited project, we've all heard that during today's presentation. It is a short-term, blunt policy instrument to deal with an air quality problem that will, we get too dependent on the funding stream, and that the substitution effect becomes greater, and we find that money from CAS is supporting bus services, is providing the funding for capital investment. It gets so much into the financial bloodstream of the authority that when it stops, it causes additional problems for us. That won't be an issue for me, because I'll be long gone, but it is something that I really want to flag up, because I think it could be damaging for the city and the city region. I am concerned about the capacity to deliver. This is not just about area committees, it's more broadly that we're dependent on contractors through our different agreements that can help us to deliver or maybe not. And I think we need to look at our arrangements for delivery partners, if I use that phrase, because I think that's actually critically important. All very well having £81 million to spend, but if there's no one there to actually do the work on the ground, I think that's an additional problem. The bus service point, and I won't dwell on this in depth, you know, we all know what the issues are. The current model of providing bus services means, for me, that you spend more for fewer services because the price tag is always going to go up. And it's a broader point, I guess, for the combined authority. We need a different model for procuring bus services. We need a franchising model, which I think will give us better value for money. So again, I'm concerned about just spending more and more on a ever-reducing number of services. Last point is I don't see rail in the list. I know rail can be expensive, but there's probably some modest rail-related investment that we can do with our partners, which would improve the take-up and the number of passenger journeys, some beach line and a whole range of other local services. I'll leave it at that, but I welcome the investment. I'm just concerned about the substitution effect long-term.
So thank you, Councillor. Some very fair points there. I mean, on the substitution point, we're acutely aware of that. So it is not a long-term, ongoing revenue stream. So I think it's a real issue and something, but it's something we're very mindful of. I'm not going to comment on the bus model, but I hear very much what you say about that. In terms of the rail, that's not something that's included, as you say. I mean, that is very much the responsibility of the combined authority under the current responsibilities. So that's not something that's currently being, but you know, that in future other amounts could be looked at differently, but that's not been part of this thinking for this 5-year plan.
Thank you, John. So it looks like we're still going to have to wait for Aston Gate to reopen, I'm afraid, Mark. Councillor Gollop.
Thank you, Tony. I'm sure this is a very good narrative report, but I make similar comments to the last one. It doesn't deal with the financials in the way I want to see it. We know that we have £26 million up to 30th of November. That suggests to me that up to the 31st of March, that will probably become £34 million. Now, when I see a report that's described as is talking about the spend over the next 5 years, I assume there might be some mention, but in fact the only way I can find out is by finding time in a busy day to scan through a budget paper to add up all the items that appear to mention using CAS money. That in itself is wrong. I should not have to go to another report to find out what may be being spent. And I've come up with a 10 million, a 10.3 million, a 250k and a 300k. Have I missed something? I have no idea. All I know is that comes nowhere near the 34 million. So then I have the question, has someone decided that some of that money is being rolled up to cover us for the period when the CAS income diminishes? That wouldn't be an unreasonable plan, but does anything tell me that? Does anything tell me the amounts? I have to say, I find it extraordinary that I'm assuming Councillor Alexander is committed to open and transparent government. I'm assuming the Cabinet is. How this report can be being taken when it is not a financial report. It doesn't actually give any picture of the financial information. So it leaves me having to find the back of an envelope to work through and work out some figures on what is a significant sum. So I suppose I'm linking this with the previous discussion. We have a collection fund for the council tax account. We ought to have a collection fund for the Clean Air Zone account that actually shows us what is going on and we should equally have a totally transparent record of how that money is proposed to be spent. I think it's really important to understand what the current administration is committing for next year and how those totals relate. What we piece together is if of 81 million, 34 million is going to arrive by the 31st of March, that tells us what is left for subsequent years. But simply trying to understand how a pot has been spent in the current year and is available to spend in the next year, it's not clear from this. And I have to say, I'd have expected more. So I am concerned that it's not there. I do not understand why we're not being open and being clear. This is a massive sum of money to come to the benefit of the authority. We owe it to the residents who are affected by poor air quality, and to all those who've contributed to this pot, to actually be clear on how we're proposing to spend the money. And it is not clear at the moment. So.
Okay, thank you. Can I just add a question to that? Is it possible to produce a table where that's shows how the proposal is for spending the money for each of the 4 years? Because I think I've got numbers for 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26 and 26, 27. I do agree with Jeff, when I was looking at them, it wasn't sure whether, and I think it was just possibly the way it was worded. It said something like 10.3 million, 2023, 24, 25, and I wasn't quite sure myself whether that was 10.3 million each year or over the both years. So would it be possible to provide a table of that type for OSM?
Yes, it is, and very happy to have a discussion about whether it's back here or Resources Scrutiny Commission or something like that.
Okay, thank you. And again, can you make that available for Lucy? John?
Yeah, no problem. Yes, Councillor, so very happy to do that. I mean, some of the the primary purpose of this report is to set out what is the 5-year plan, which is a requirement under the order, which sets out how the money is being allocated to different uses. So that's its focus. Obviously, it's separate from the budget for next year, which is coming separately, as you know. Some of the amounts involved are capable of being allocated to and can be allocated to particular years, and that's certainly what we've done, isn't it? So the CRSTS has been modelled against particular years. That may well change because it goes forward in different ways. Similarly with the transport levy, that is an annual thing. When we're looking at the local funding, I don't think we have allocated that to particular years at this stage, have we? So that's will be part of developing a future plan. That is a lump sum, if you see what I mean, which has not yet been allocated to particular years. I just wanted to prepare for it. It's not all capable of being split up in that way.
I think, Chair, if I can just add, I look at the overall position and see that it's actually it's potentially a good news story in the current financial situation because it's a pot of money available to spend. So I am then baffled why we don't portray it in a positive way. I don't expect that you can allocate to set years when things are going to happen at this stage. I understand that. I would expect there to be a massive amount of estimation, but I would love to see a table that just showed me what's anticipated when so that I can get a feel of it, because I couldn't even work out whether I needed to count a £10 million figure twice or whether it was only in there once. And just seeing a table where I can actually identify it just helps to give me peace of mind. But actually, I think it gives openness in terms of the cabinet paper. So that would be just my plea. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Steve?
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with what's been said. I can't make that add up to £81 million. Don't understand it at all. So I'm afraid it doesn't give us a 5-year plan. We just can't see where it's going. But until we get that table, I want to focus on the transport levy line, please. So can you just tell us how much will the transport levy be that goes from BCC to WECA in 24-25? How does that compare to previous years, and how much of it will be funded through CAS?
So what we're assuming at the moment is the current level of the transport levy, albeit when the contracts around supported bus services allow us to increase our contribution then. So Obviously, there will be discussions between the combined authority and the unitary authorities about what the level of the transport levy should be, and if it changes, we'll have to make an adjustment. But it's assumed to be the current level.
And what is the current level?
£10.3 million.
Okay, so we're going to spend the same £10.3 million that we're spending now, which clearly isn't enough because tech services are all being cancelled. We're just replacing that 10.3 million with 10.3 million from CAS.
That's right for next year. So in future years, there are additional amounts assumed, because I think it's right from 25-26. There's an additional amount, isn't there, to assume for additional services, because it actually takes a little while to put additional services in place, Councillor. So that's what's modelled. So there is some additional amounts from the year after next.
Okay, well, it'll take a lot longer to put services in place if we don't come up with the money for another 12 months, won't it?
I'm just explaining what we've done.
Councillor Alexander?
On the general point about buses, we do pay a significant amount every year in transport levy to WECA, and as one of the unitaries that comprises WECA, we have together received a large amount of BSIP money, and that's part of our collaborative working to form WECA. It's our view that there are services which are not yet being provided, which should be provided as part of that payment. Whilst that continues, I would not advocate paying for them for a second time. I will continue saying what I've said to WECA officers and the Mayor, that there are certain expectations that we have in terms of missing services in the city.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilcox and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back on statements that Councillor Bradshaw and Councillor Gollop have talked about the lack of the Clean Air Zone money will end in 10 years. I don't think it will. And I'm basing that on the fact that the World Health Organization have deemed that the safe level of NO2 is 10 milligrams on an annual basis. And we're currently working on a JACU principle of 40 milligrams. So we will have to provide cleaner air for our residents. So we will be having a clean air zone of some sort to provide clean air. Chair.
Yeah, sorry, David. I was going to ask something similar to this. I think at the moment, the legal obligation we have as a local authority is to meet the clean air standards for, which is 40 micrograms per cubic meter, which is a legal standard agreed by the government, and I think actually it was agreed when we were still part of the European Union. The standards that have been put out by the World Health Organization, WHO, they do set a lower standard, but they are not legally binding upon the UK government. Now, what I think your point does allude to is that there may come a time that a future government of whatever colour may decide that 40 micrograms per cubic metre is not good enough, and then may say that we have to demonstrate that whether it's 10 or whether it's 25, which is the other measurement they use. And then we may have to look at whether we need to keep the clean air zone in order to get to those new standards. But I think at the moment, the situation is all the figures are looking like we're going to meet the current standard within a very short time. If that doesn't occur, and there is changes to government legislation, then that'd be a problem for the next administration or even the one after that, perhaps.
Indeed, that was the point I was going to make. But going back to a question, I've got, that's the wrong boat. During looking at the full business cases that were made, we were expecting revenue of around 44.2 million over 10 years. And now we're expecting 81 million. Can I have some ideas about why we've grossly underestimated it in the full business case?
So that's well before my time at the council, but my understanding is that there was a degree of caution included in the estimates, because perhaps going the other way and being over optimistic would be more difficult. But there was a model at the time. It made assumptions. There was a degree of, I suppose, statistical bias tested or sensitivity testing, and it was found at the time to be the correct assumption. What we've been able to do now is update our modelling based on actual behaviours and refine the model anyway, and that is what has produced the different outcome.
Thank you. And a question for Councillor Alexander. If we realised that we were going to bring in £81 million over 10 years, would he be keener to implement the zone?
Well, as I seem to remember, the discussion went something like, I felt it was a blunt instrument and I would have preferred that the money was spent on bus services, and you would have liked one that covered the whole city. I would still have preferred that the money was spent on bus services, because I think it would have achieved the same result and it would have been more equitable, is my personal response.
I think what I also say is we're getting into what-if territories here. Is, you know, we don't have a time machine. We can't go around and do what Councillor Alexander wanted to do, or what perhaps you would want to do. We are,
but I was goaded, Chair.
Sorry?
I was goaded, but I accept we are. Yeah.
Okay, next on my list, so I have Councillor Brown and then Councillor Fodor.
Thanks, Chair. When the table was produced of the profile of anticipated spending, can we have a profile of the anticipated receipts as well? Just because that would be useful. I have tried to do a little table of myself to interpret these figures, and the two observations that I would make is that it looks like cracking on for half of the money raised is going to be funding our transport levy to some extent over the next 5 years. So that's the first observation. The other observation is that £16 million of the money seems to have been committed to plug a hole in this year's budget, i.e. 23-24, before we've even seen the figures or had a chance to have any sort of scrutiny on the arrangements. Anyway, those are two observations. My question is, who determines the transport levy?
I'll try, but I might need to defer to Councillor Alexander. But it's my understanding it is based on a historic contributions towards buses, and then the formation of the combined authority set the level. But that's probably as far as my transport expertise goes, I'm afraid.
Yep, that's correct, and it is contentious, especially when you feel that you haven't got the value for money that you would like from it. It does cover not just bus services, it covers concessionary passes. In fact, the main component of it covers concessionary passes, which is incredibly important to residents in our city. What is left is minimal, but yes, it is a difficult thing, and also because none of the unitaries have got any spare money. So whether we're talking about 4 or 5 years' time, that will be a decision for a future administration. But you know, there is no spare money to talk about one lot of money being spent on one thing when it should be spent on another. We know that every local authority in this country is close to bankruptcy and must spend money on keeping social care, adult social care, children's social care going.
Thanks. The reason I asked that is because I've asked officers from both this authority and WECA that question this week and had conflicting answers. So I was wondering if further light could be shed on the matter. And just one final question, which comes back to the transport levy and the contribution, the new funding towards transport levy that you mentioned. It's not clear in the papers because it talks about this 1.59 million or something from 25-26, but it's actually the way it's worded, it's not clear so that's a new anticipated increase to the contribution from 25 and in the subsequent years. Is that right?
That's correct.
It's speculative, is it not? That's not agreed.
Agreed. That's true. So it's the proposal within the paper, and then that we budget for that. That's correct.
For the purposes of our budgeting, it is not what we have agreed. No.
Okay, I think we're straying into budget territory, and I can feel Councillor Gollop starting to send out signals to me about straying into his committee's territory. So what I'm going to do is, Martin, a very quick one, because I want to move on to the performance report, because we are already over time.
Okay, Chair. It isn't necessarily a quick thing, but I think it's something that needs to be flagged at this point, because we're looking at something very specific relating to the CAS, the income and the outcomes of the CAS, or at least the first report we've ever seen of what's happened. But that has to be in the context of the transport plan, which is identified obviously as one of the background documents. So it's virtually 4 years since the Joint Strategic Transport Plan was approved in this room by WECA in March 2020. And the year before, the Mayor actually promised a comprehensive air quality plan, not just dealing with 40 parts per million, which is the tick box that this document is having to sort of measure against. And a couple of cabinet members before John, the council itself prepared its Bristol transport plan so that it knew what Bristol wanted in the context of what was coming from WECA in 2020. So we need to sort of bring that together at some point and say, to what extent is this process of this clean air zone and this funding, net funding, that's now available and is coming for a few years, is it delivering what Bristol and what WECA expected to happen in the city? So there's genuinely clearer air, and also that there are long-term shifts in the modes, which is what we're supposedly committed to. Not just letting the traffic run through the city a bit cleaner, but deal with the tyres and brakes, particulates, congestion and so on. And that means putting in place better active travel and better buses, both of which are really important, and I hope they'll get the funding. So are we getting towards delivering some of those long-term goals? And if it's not going to be discussed today, can we come back to it? Because that's what really matters to the people of Bristol.
Yeah, I think you're straying into doing an election speech rather than... I agree with you, it's important about this area, about this topic, but it's going into an area where we probably don't have the time to have that debate at this thing. But it is something that should be brought up and important, and I think every single councillor in this group wants to make sure that we tackle air quality and deliver all the good things that we do want to deliver. And how we do it is often where we start to fall out. What I'm going to do now is thank Alex, John and Adam in his absence, and Don. Thank you for coming along. What we'll now do is move on to the next agenda item, which I'd almost forgotten the number, but it's agenda item 8.
Tony, can I just interrupt a moment? Only that I'm going to have to leave it by 6:30, and I was hoping to be able to make some comments on the Mayor's forward plan, and I'm worried that we might run out of time, and I think that those issues are so fundamental to the way the new committee system will work that I would have hoped we'd have a chance to discuss that whilst I was here.
Okay, I understand that, Councillor Gollop, but I'm also aware that we do have the Q2 performance plan. What I will say is that I think that OSM will be, I think we do need to provide a report to Cabinet about the clean air zone, and I think as part of that we should once again raise our concerns about the forward plan. I'm afraid I am going to carry on with agenda item number 8, because I think we know what the problem is. The forward plan is basically we are not getting the information, enough information in enough time for us to be able to plan ahead, and there are concerns that that information is available, isn't necessarily being made available to us.
Yeah, in which case, if I'm not here when we get to it, can I just ask that Stephen notes that, and I know he notes it because I know he agrees with it, but it is just so fundamentally important, and we can't leave it till May to realise we've got a problem with committees knowing what they're meant to be discussing.
Okay, noted. Nick, and just to remind members that Nick is here to give an overview for OSM. Many of the areas that he's covering, your own separate committees will go into in more detail. And to avoid Nick having to repeatedly say, I'll have to go away and get that information for you, I will just bring your attention to the fact that in the sheets in the papers, for each of the thematic areas, it does give the name of the lead officer. And it may well be that you may want to contact him directly, copying Nick in with any questions you have about anything that's brought up today. Is that fair to say, Nick?
Yeah, thank you. Right, thank you very much. This will be relatively brief, certainly the part from myself. This is the Q2 performance summary. As with Q1, it's a short summary report. There is a table of data, a couple of pages into the performance part, which has got a couple of headline points for each of the themes. As has been the case for a while, the structure is around the themes of the Council's business plan and corporate strategy. Yeah, so like the table that's on screen there. We've got a summary of the proportion of actions overall that are on target, of metrics and of city outcomes, as we call them, and then the colours that are for the 7 themes, Q1 and Q2. As you can see, it's things overall are a little bit dipped in Q2 compared to where they were Q1. And again, just to set the scene, this, not quite the same, but effectively the same report, the same data, is at Cabinet on Tuesday next week. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind just scrolling that down a little bit to the next page, that's where the table, so within that table there, there's, for each of the 7 themes, there's a couple of headline bullet points. To be honest, I wasn't planning to go through those in particular, as they're there to see, and there is obviously all the data within. And the other point is, as previously in Q1, there is the dashboard, performance dashboard. That the link is within the report in multiple places, and then that's got all the details in for everything. So it's really just for questions.
Okay, do we have any questions? Nick, we finally cracked it.
Well, I think the idea then is to come after a 2-hour CAS item, and no one had the appetite. But all right, and I know we've got further discussions on the development of the plan for this year, etc., as some of us discussed briefly on a Monday, and we'll continue following EDMs with discussion in February. Oh, yeah.
Councillor Fodor.
Yeah, quick one. I mean, the encouraging thing is that what I can see doesn't have a lot of red on it, which must be reassuring for you, because it probably means there are going to be fewer. There have indeed been fewer questions. Is that because issues that had been red are addressed, or are there indeed some changes which have kind of eliminated some of those issues from the reporting? Because there have been some changes, haven't there?
In terms of the reds, this is just looking at the summary point, what we're looking at there on these first couple of pages. So it's to be honest, relatively unusual that we've got reds coming across at the summary level for the theme. Within the detailed in the dashboard, there are certainly reds, particularly in some of the performance metrics. For example, effective development organisation, more internal-based one, has got quite a few reds in the internal performance metrics there.
And just to double check, if there's any councillors who still don't know how to use the dashboard, drop Nick a line, because what I will say is it's a bit like Pinpoint Plus. Once you get in there, sometimes it's hard to get back out again.
Yeah. And there is within the public link as well, there is the guidance page, and within that the user guide that also helps to talk through in a few pages how to navigate around the dashboard.
That's how. Could I say, like, thinking ahead to the new committees and government, at a very early stage, it would be really helpful to make sure they do all understand this with some actual hands-on practice, because otherwise they won't start looking properly at performance. So when they need to. So I hope that can be built in.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be looking to do inductions with new councillors as soon as possible.
You basically said what both me and Lucy were about to say, so thank you. Thanks, Nick. And I hope you enjoyed coming along for the entertainment, if nothing else.
Very interesting, yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to try and move quite quickly through the finer sessions, if I can find my agenda page. Okay, so agenda item number 9 is to note the work programme. I don't know if anybody has anything they want to raise about the work programme, except it's still a work in progress to a certain extent, because there are some things that we're waiting to put into that. Then agenda item number 10, we've already discussed, is the Mayor's Forward Plan. And Jeff, you were here in the end. So Stephen, Jeff wanted to make a point. And I think, we all agree that the forward plan will be better. And then item number 11 is just for information, which is the minutes from the WECA Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is chaired by Councillor Wilcox, I believe. Oh, it's WECA. Who knows? So is there anything that anybody wants to make comments about those minutes? I don't believe so. In that case, I think that's the last item. Thank you all very much for attending. Sorry we went slightly over, but we did have some very important things to discuss, and I suspect we'll probably continue to discuss them for some time to go. Thank you for the members of the public. We lost Suzanne, but Dan stayed to the bitter end. And thank you to the members of the press. Everybody have a safe journey home. It's very cold out there. Thank you, everyone.